Hello and welcome to PowerBuilder TV. Today's webinar is Appeon Web, a look under the hood. Today's presenter, Chris Pollach, is a senior solutions architect with over 30 years experience in various aspects of systems design, security, mobility, web, object-oriented tools and methodologies, database, and data communications. Chris is the owner of Software Tool and Die Inc., a company dedicated to providing custom software and education solutions on object-oriented business systems. His use of PowerBuilder extends back to version 0.8 alpha, starting in November of 1989. Chris has been accredited as a certified Sybase instructor, certified PowerBuilder professional, certified Silverstream developer, and has also written numerous articles in various popular magazines and newsletters. Welcome, Chris.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us here at PowerBuilder TV, and a big thanks to the PowerBuilder TV team to host the webinar and allow me to present today. As you can see, it's Appeon Web, a look under the hood. As you can see from my presentation here, I'm dressed as in nice clothes here. So we're going to have a look under the hood, but I'm not going to delve in 45 to 50 minutes too technically deep, because there's a lot of information on this product. It's an amazing amount of stuff that you can do with it. But I will give you a guided tour of under the hood. So we'll look at the engine, the intake manifold, the exhaust manifolds, the fuel injector, how the engine connects to the transmission, the torque converter, the steering, the brakes. So we'll look at the major technical pieces, but I won't delve deep into them because we could probably do a webinar on each one of those things that I just mentioned. There's a lot of technical breadth here to this product and what you can do with it. So again, I'm Chris Pollach. I'm located here in Canada's capital of Ottawa. There's my email address for you, cpollach@travelnet.com. You're welcome to email me anytime with questions, and you can join me also, of course, on the Sybase, SAP, I should say, news groups, through the blog, through my LinkedIn and SourceForge, whatever. The two ones of interest here are the blog. The blog itself is available to anyone, and I post a lot of information there on the blog of what's happening. For example, about the framework was just released. On the left-hand side, you can see links to Appeon, PowerBuilder Central, and different products that work with that. You can see on the right-hand side links to various people that maintain websites with all sorts of other information that may be useful to you. And then a list on the right-hand side of archive articles. And you can also use the search here as well at the top and search for a particular topic of things that I've blogged. So there's a lot of information on this particular blog about PowerBuilder and Appeon and Novalis products and technologies that have been released and what I've done with it or I've seen other people do with it. So I just wanted to point that out. That may be of interest to people, is to visit the blog every once in a while and see what's going on. The other one, of course, is I do have a set of frameworks for Appeon and PowerBuilder for both the client and the web services. That's available on SourceForge. So that's another one that you may want to pay attention to. That is the different frameworks. There's the example applications specifically because there are applications there that show off Appeon Web, for example, or Appeon Mobile or PowerBuilder, taking it to the extremes. So the look today on the agenda, we're going to have a look at the basic technical architecture and how the pieces fit together. We'll look at the difference between Appeon Web comes in two pieces, the developer piece and the server piece. We'll have a look in the technical aspects of those two pieces and how they work together, how they build things that execute at runtime, how that topology looks like. We'll actually look at putting a PowerBuilder app on to the web using Appeon Web from scratch. So I'll have a quick little tour of how to do that. We'll look at some of the things you may want to think about when you're building your PowerBuilder code so you can reuse the same code both in PowerBuilder native applications and PowerBuilder Web and even PowerBuilder Mobile, which we're not talking about today. We'll look at how all these pieces integrate, so how your code can interact in the PowerBuilder environment, Appeon, with the operating system, with the web browser, with web services, etc., etc. We'll also look at a quick tour of thinking about the graphic user interface, PowerBuilder native, for example, versus building a native web application to look like and feel like a web application. Appeon Web is cloud enabled. So a couple little pieces there about thinking about if you're going to move your applications from once you get to Appeon Web into a cloud environment. Performance considerations, that is, you go along building things and you want to make sure that they run in a scalable fashion. And as I go along, I'll just throw in tips and tricks that I've learned along the way. I've used Appeon Web, by the way, exclusively since about 2008. I've actually used it before that, but Armin and the Appeon gang didn't have a .NET flavor at that point. It was only a J2EE flavor, so I used some of the Java aspects of Appeon before that. But when the .NET realm came out, that really perked my interest because a lot of my Canadian government clients are .NET as well as Java. So having the Appeon Web available in both flavors is nice too. And that's something else for you guys to keep in mind. Just a warning here that once you get into Appeon Web, it's amazing what you can do with this thing. So just a warning here that PowerBuilder developers may replace Appeon Web with chocolate as their #1 craving that in the future. Once you get into it, it's very addictive software. I just love it. So let's just have a look first of all at an Appeon or even a web application in general. It's typically a multi-tiered environment where you've got on the left-hand side a web browser. You're going through some kind of a firewall to a web server that's serving up your JavaScript, your HTML resources. Then executable code there calling business logic on an application server, and that of course being connected to some kind of database engine of some kind. So that's typically your like a 4-tier architecture that you see in most applications. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at see how Appeon Web supports that. As you can see here on the bottom left, it's taking a PowerBuilder application code and it's automatically transforming it into a web object. But what it really does is it slices and dices your code, and then it outputs some information for the web browser, some for the web server, and some for the application server. And we also have to talk about the application server in light of Appeon Server, which is really not an application server, it's really a helper to one of the application servers that you may have installed, like IIS or WebLogic or JBoss, that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's move to a sort of a technical view of what happens when you install PowerBuilder, and then Appeon Web on top of that, because it's a bolt-on. So first of all, when you install Appeon Web, the first thing that's going to happen is in your PowerBuilder Classic environment, you're going to see the application Appeon Developer piece plugged into the IDE. That piece is constantly monitoring whatever you do. So as you're building and testing objects here in your PowerBuilder libraries, and that this piece of software, Appeon Developer, is constantly monitoring what you're building. And that so it can have a look and say, oh, that's a user object, that's a menu, and it keeps track of what you're doing because it needs to synchronize all those pieces with those 3 tiers. That the web server, the application server, and building components for the web browser. So it's constantly available to you in the background. So if we were to break out here and have a look at, here's my PowerBuilder 12.6 for example, and we're actually going to be converting an application called Lost Logos today to a web application. That's an application that I build when I teach the Introduction to PowerBuilder course, and I've changed my course material now in recent years to include, what would you do today when you build a native PowerBuilder application to make it Appeon Web enabled, for example. And I use that as a teaching vehicle. But you can see here this extra toolbar along the bottom here. You can see here I click the Help button, and it brings up the Appeon PowerBuilder Help. I can bring up a configuration wizard, I can bring up a deployment wizard, and I can bring up a runtime wizard, and I can bring up a debugging wizard, and I can debug a target, So this lower toolbar that you see here is basically your interface to the application Appeon Developer component. So that automatically gets installed in all your PowerBuilder IDEs that are installed on your desktop. So I'm running PowerBuilder 12.1, 12.5.1, and 12.6 here on my laptop that I'm broadcasting from today. And as soon as Appeon is installed, it automatically puts that extra toolbar into all the IDEs automatically during the install. So this is what we're looking at here when I show this picture on the left-hand side. You can see here from the PowerBuilder side, PowerBuilder, of course, can build now from 12.6, 64-bit, 32-bit. It can build WinForm, and it can also build .NET assemblies, and it can also build, let me just zip back over here, it can build web services. So all of those are available from the PowerBuilder Classic IDE in that. So we can still continue to do that with Appeon Web installed. We just have all these extra things that we can do, which is the top right-hand side of this diagram. You'll see here in this diagram is saying that anything that goes to the top right-hand side, there's no PowerBuilder virtual machine required anymore. And that, so those of you, well, one of the reasons that you may want to think about Appeon Web is the fact that you can basically makes your deployment a lot easier because everything comes off the application server, everything comes dynamically delivered real-time to the web browser, so those headaches of deploying all sorts of install packages and things like that go away. The user just logs in and Appeon says, oh, there's a new version, hey, let's run that if you'd like, and away you go. And so this top right-hand side here is all the Appeon pieces of that, and you don't require the runtime anymore. Now the two interesting things to look at here is that when you deploy something from Appeon Web, the developer is going to deploy things to the web server. It's also going to deploy things to an application server. The application server, again, is going to be IIS, WebLogic, WebSphere, JBoss, etc. And inside the application server is the Appeon server. And I really still refer to this as a helper to whatever application server you have installed. So let's have a look here. What's in the helper? As you can see here, there's a whole, what they call a framework, but really what it is, a whole bunch of modules that help you with security, session management, database transaction management, data access, because there's a data access layer here over to your database engine. And then it's providing unique things for the PowerBuilder classes, for example, support for web services, non-visual objects, SQL, and data windows. Data window being also the web service data window, as well as data windows from the point of view of caching primary buffers and things like that. So that's the helper that gets installed in the application server, this Appeon server piece. So as Appeon Developer goes through here and scans your code, that it's checking to see, for example, do you have data windows, do you have non-visual objects, et cetera, and it actually then builds, for example, C# code that to handle that and drops it over here. And that's if you, for example, if you're in an IIS environment. If you're a Java shop, then it's going to build Java code and drop it in here because you're running WebLogic, for example, which I run Appeon Web on, and that is amazing engine. The response time on the Oracle engine is really impressive, and very scalable too when you have hundreds of users on. And IIS is very good as well. We'll talk about that very shortly. The other thing that's happening, of course, is that it's scanning the other objects in here and figuring out that, hey, some of those things have to be converted to HTML, XML, and JavaScript. So it's actually looking at those kind of PowerBuilder objects and then slicing and dicing that and putting that on your web server. Which, of course, all of that information is being served up automatically, and that when you go to launch your web browser, whatever that is. And we should note here in recent versions of Appeon Web that they also support these other web browsers. So it is a multi-browser environment now. Compared to, some of you may not have looked at it for a few years, it was only a single browser environment. It's now multi-browser. All right, so what happens here if you take a regular PowerBuilder application that you see here on the left-hand side and you move it to a web environment? So now that we have the environment set up here, and we can actually see it here. Now here's the order entry application that I was just showing you here on the slides. If we were to run this, so here's the welcome screen. This is a multilingual application. It's the simple order application that's on the SourceForge website. So just basically I use it as a test for my frameworks, but because the framework is multilingual, this example application supports 4 different languages as an example. We can see here in native mode that we're running on build 201 here, this particular application. We can see the amount of memory, both physical and virtual, on my actual laptop here, which is an HP machine. The type of processor I have, which is an AMD, which is my favorite processor. I do not use Intel. And the fact that, for support information, when this thing was last compiled, and what database I'm connected to, and how to contact the person who wrote this particular application. If we were to log into the application, we can see here that we're connected actually to a SQL Anywhere database. And then you can see here a nice list here. You can sort the list up and down. And this is my framework that automatically does that for you to provide that in a list type of data window. If you double click it, of course, it opens it. You can look at a master detail here. You can actually see the calendar object, which comes from my framework. You can see a drop-down calendar from here. So drop-down data windows are supported, edit styles are supported. In the framework here, for example, I allow anything to be zoomable, and so everything is easily changed so that if people are using a web browser or a native monitor that doesn't look as good as what the application designer first thought of, they can resize anything that they want. For those of you who haven't used my framework for the last year, you'll notice here that this is a new feature called multiple data window zooming. And this is a very important feature to think about when we get to talk about a proper graphic interface for the web browser, by the way. That was a cool feature I added just for that. But you can see that we can bring up the calculator. Those people see that saying, hey, he's running Windows 10. And absolutely, I've had no problems running PowerBuilder 12.1, 12.5.1, and 12.6 on my Windows 10 machines, but I will make the disclaimer, I'm using AMD chipset only. And I don't seem to have all these problems that other people keep talking about in the news groups. So you can see here's the one with different tab pages that's on here. So we can run tab pages again, we can tile them, and we can cascade them. And typical behavior that we may want to do. We can also call the Windows operating system from here as well. For example, lock the workstation is actually going to lock the workstation. And that's a nice picture. So for those of you who are wondering about my picture on SCN, by the way, is I am a martial arts instructor, so that's me sitting in front of the flag. I teach every Monday and Thursday. So that's actually my debug uniform there. So anyway, let's just end the application here. This is the way it works natively. What happens when I deploy that to the web? Well, that's already been done. And so in this particular case, I just wanted to show you that you can basically take PowerBuilder code that's written from one code, it runs across multiple browsers, and you can also call web services behind the scenes, which is what this application has been doing all along. So let's just get rid of that IDE here, go to the web browser, and if I click on here, I already have a link to that application. It's already been deployed to the Appeon components that I've gone through. And there it is. There's the welcome screen, the ability here to go to the About screen, see the same information. The only difference is that there is a web tab because my framework says, hey, this is a web-based application now, so let me just show you the web things, like what is your actual client ID, what is your IP address, which server are you connected to? Are you Java or .NET? Because remember, Appeon comes in both flavors. So I'm talking to a .NET flavor, and that I can see where my temporary files are being written. So a lot of information here that I can glean from the Appeon interface, which we haven't talked about yet. So if I log in here, that's going to take a second here as I call some web services to help me do that. It uses Active Directory, by the way, to single sign-on. So all of that is happening behind the scenes with different web services. Notice here the sorting is working okay. If I use the right-hand mouse button, the zooming is happening the same. That's remembered too by you notice here that if I come back here and I get that information, that all this information is available back again. So again, I could sort our phone numbers. That I have the built-in framework calendar working in the browser here. I have the drop-down equivalent of the calendar working. So drop-down data windows are working, edit styles are working. There's a checkbox, edit styles, radio buttons are working. We can have a look here at the tab pages. They're working at this point. And that, for example, I can put this into preview mode, and I can go into zoom mode here, and I can actually zoom in and out so I can actually see what this thing's going to look like before it's actually printed. And that. So everything that I would expect, like bringing up the calculator here, for example, everything is working exactly the same. There is no change in the source code whatsoever. That the help is working, and that exactly like it would in the native application. If I wanted to lock my workstation, boom, there it is. I'm locked. So now I've got to come back in again. So whether I'm running this application natively or now I have zero deployment problems, I just run it in the web browser, everything is working exactly the same. Windows are tiling and cascading and tiling. And notice the response time. It's just unbelievable. When you get into a heavy data environment and try and do this in a plain HTML using Microsoft products or other web development tools, that you'll find that it's amazing here because Appeon behind the scenes is compressing and encrypting and decrypting the data window data stream, that caching things locally, caching things on the application server helper, and that. So the response time as you scale up people to tens of people or hundreds of people is amazing when you look at some of the technical things that are being done under the covers here that we haven't really even got into talking about yet. So I've been able to deploy a lot of PowerBuilder applications to the web like this, and users are saying, hey, this Appeon web application is actually running faster than my native application. And I'm saying, yeah, and I'm not surprised about that. So anyway, we'll just exit here, and that's a quick tour of an application that was already done. Yeah, so also what I'm going to do is I've got a single slide here, and I'll refer back to this one because as we go along here, I'll refer back to this architecture topology here as we go along here a little further in the presentation. Okay, so we've seen an actual application run that's been deployed. That what happens if I start from scratch? So this is what I thought to myself. Let's take that Lost Logos application that I built here in my introduction to PowerBuilder course, and let's webify it. Yeah, and I'll show you basically what to do. And how easy it is. So let's go back also then to this slide here that we've got Appeon Developer plugged in, we've got the IDE. I just need to tell it which application it's working on, and I need to get it to deploy these pieces here. This Lost Logos application also uses web services. So I'm not going to go into building web services in this particular presentation, but I'm going to show you that they do exist, they can be used, and we're actually going to call those web services from the Appeon server as well. So there's going to be a call into that from here as well. Yeah, because I'm doing it here in native PowerBuilder, so why can't I do it in the web application? So let's go back here to deploying an application. So again, we'll go back here to the Lost Logos application. You can see here that there is a web service. And I've got a non-visual object here to help me with some kind of Active Directory database login of some kind. And all I'm going to do here is basically deploy it. So before I do that, I'll just go here to www.root, and then we'll have a look at the project for this. You'll see here that it's actually going to build a web service called Lost Logos Login. And if you look here, there's nothing in the www.root that's Lost Logos Login. So I'm going to go from here. We're just going to deploy the web service. And we'll see here along the bottom and it's actually now communicating to the IIS server. It's building actually a .NET web service assembly. Because this is PowerBuilder 12.6, by the way, this is being built in .NET 4.0 or 4.5. And if I was using PowerBuilder 12.1, I'd be using .NET 2.0 or 3.5. That's the only version that it supports, but 12.6 supports 4 or 4.5. So let's have a look here and see now if we've got some and I just do a refresh, and you can see here that there's now 2 files been added to the IIS web server: Lost Logos login and Lost Logos login root. So basically the web service has been deployed by running the project, and that just choosing deploy. So now what I need to do is I've got to go back to our big diagram here, and that of the technical layout. That I've got this piece done, and that ready to go. So now what I need to do is I need to go back to the Appeon Developer, and I need to say, hey, how do you plug these 2 pieces in? So I can deploy to the web server and to the Appeon server. I need to be able to deploy these pieces, and I need to be able to deploy these pieces from whatever's sitting in my PowerBuilder library over here. So this is where we are now. That's step number 2. So what I'm going to do now, actually, before I do that, I'm going to log in. I'll show you the Appeon Enterprise Manager. So I can talk directly to the Appeon server. And it's important here is I wanted to show you this as a data source. Because remember that when you deploy a PowerBuilder application to Appeon, you're no longer communicating to the database engine. Everything is going to be done automatically for you by the Appeon data access layer. So somehow I need to tell the data access layer what databases are available. For example, I've got ASE running here, I've got Microsoft SQL Server, maybe through ODBC, I've got SQL Anywhere, I could have DB2, Oracle, etc., etc. I need to be able to define that connectivity between the Appeon server and the database engine. I use the Appeon Enterprise Manager here to do that. It's an interface that allows me to talk directly to the Appeon server component. So the Lost Logos application uses the same sample database that comes with PowerBuilder. Appeon provides the same database. They call it Appeon sample. So that data source already exists. And if you click here, you can see that the database engine has automatically responded, sort of saying, hey, that data source is good. The database engine is working. So the data access layer is done. So if we go back to this slide here, that is this piece here that we see here is already done. So what I need to do here is I need to define how to get these pieces over and how transaction management is going to be done. And I need to use Appeon Developer for that. So let's go back to Appeon Developer and let's create a configuration. So I choose the first icon on the toolbar, which is basically configuration guide, which is a wizard. The wizard basically is going to ask me some questions about the application. So I'm going to say, for example, I'm going to call the application Lost Logos. It's going to be a web. Notice I can make it 3 different types of things. Today we're only focusing on web. So I'm just going to say only deploy that as a web application. And then I just follow on. Next thing it's going to say is where is the target for that? So there's the Lost Logos target. As soon as I do that, it says, hey, you're using PowerBuilder 12.6. Yeah, congratulations. Then it's going to say, hey, I need to be able to deploy some of these pieces to your Appeon server. And I also need to do some transaction management. So get prepared to what kind of transaction management and database DML am I going to use? Well, I'm going to use SQL Anywhere. So it's testing the connection. It says, hey, yeah, Appeon server recognizes that particular database engine because we have a connectivity piece already defined. Now you're going to say, hey, I'm using a transaction object called SQLCA. That's going to be taken away from you in the Appeon environment. So even though you refer to SQLCA, you think you're connecting and disconnecting and you're running SQL through it, you're not. Really what's happening is the Appeon data access layer is basically taking over control of that and multi-threading your database connections through its data access layer. It just needs to know which transaction objects you're using, what flavor of SQL to expect. So here I'm saying using SQL Anywhere. Anytime I refer to SQL Anywhere, sorry, SQL CA, that I want you to basically reroute all my SQL to this database connection that the Appeon server already has. So I just defined that SQL CA really refers to this particular flavor of database. Anytime you see that in the PowerBuilder source code, take over. Now the wizard says, for example, oh, I need to deploy things to the web server, like image files, HTML, JavaScript, whatever. So I say, hey, scan the main development folder and any of its subfolders looking for those pieces. Do you have an INI file? Well, yes, I do. So there it is. So I select the Los Logos INI file, and Appeon server will emulate the INI file for you. That's really neat. Do you have any external DLLs that you need to do? There, add files, things like that. I'll register them. These can also be .NET DLLs. They don't just have to be CDLs. Right? It'll handle both. I don't have any in this particular application, so I'm just going to skip that and deploy. So now what's happening here, Appeon Developer is scanning the source code in your PowerBuilder library, and it's building the XML, the HTML, the JavaScript. It's taking your data window objects, your non-visual objects, it's putting in the Appeon server. It's doing all that transformation at this point. So this will take a little bit longer the first time because it's going to do everything. Hey, look at that, no errors at this point. However, there is an analysis report. It says, hey, some things may not work as anticipated. So you can see here it's saying, you're using some help stuff that it may not be supported. For example, the help command, help events in this case, are not supported. So the question is, do you use the help event? If you don't use it, it's not a problem. I'm using also some shared instance counters. Shared variables are not supported. So it's suggesting here that you may need to think about rewriting that at this point. So it's suggesting that if you really need those shared variables, you may have to rethink this particular aspect. So this analysis report is pretty good. As you first go through it, the application may run. There may be a few little rough edges to it, but typically Appeon will take the safe side. It won't crash. It just won't support that particular feature. If you went into the help file, for example, and you did a search on unsupported, then you'll probably find a whole bunch of little minor things like unsupported functions, unsupported objects. So every once in a while you'll find a few things that may or may not be supported. For example, pipelines, or being able to do application profiling, or application tracing and things like that. Well, those are more within the native Win32 environment. So there's not a lot of things that aren't supported. Typically, they're things that you really don't care about in a web application, although we're going to show you a little bit later in this presentation how to actually handle that from the Appeon side, because there are features in the Appeon environment that handle that. So what happens here at this point, if I'm deployed at this point, if I bring up here, I have a link here to the Los Logos application, and here it is. This is actually a web service call for Active Directory that passed OK. And we can see here the behavior of this application. If I go back to my IIS root folder, you'll see that another folder has been deployed here, and this is how Appeon has actually converted all your things here into JavaScript, HTML, XML, and that everything's been converted at this point. Your non-visual objects have been converted, and it's handling now your database connections and everything. So that's what the Appeon Developer has done. It's translated all that stuff, put the appropriate pieces in either the web server or the application server, and it's ready to go. If we were to go to the actual application and run it, you'll see here that it works exactly the same as advertised. Just has a little bit more of a sexier look here. There's a little bit of shading going on here. and that, but the basic application works exactly the same. So if we were to go back and have a look at the overall high-level technical, what's happening here, and I'll just switch over to pen mode here, is at the logon screen, which you see here in the client browser, that when I enter my user ID, it's actually going to go here and execute the logon screen. That actually goes through and executes a web service data window. The web service data window is using the web service part of the framework in the Appeon server, and that's actually going out here calling the .NET web service that I built in PowerBuilder, which is going over here to the operating system and talking to Active Directory, saying, "Hey, is Chris Pollach okay?" And that gets an answer gets returned to here. That answer gets then returned to there, and away you go. That you're logged in. So that's what's happening behind the scenes at this point. So let's back up here and have a look at. I can come back to my Lost Logos here. All right, so when I enter the password here, if I enter something incorrect, and that it would come back and say, hey, you don't have those particular credentials, because again, at that point, Active Directory says, hey, this is a single sign-on, and that, sorry, I won't let you through. If you do enter the correct thing, of course, we call the web service, it calls Active Directory, everything's okay. My logic says, hey, let's proceed, and away you go, we're back into the application. Now, what happens at this point if it doesn't work? So this is where we're going to continue on now to the next slide. After we got things working, you may have some problems in that, so you need to debug it. And of course, I'm assuming that most of you guys out there don't have to worry about that because you write perfect code the first time, but just in case you don't, and that now you can run through the PowerBuilder debugger from the classic IDE, and you're basically into a nice rich debugger where you have breakpoints, watch points, you can see your instance shared pools, global pools, etc., etc. So how do you do that in a web browser? Well, the nice thing is Appeon Web has an Appeon debugger to allow you to basically open its debugger, which looks virtually the same and functions exactly the same as the PowerBuilder IDE Classic, to be able to look at your code and debug it if it's not working optimally the way you had designed it. So what you have to do first of all is you have to install the Microsoft Script Debugger. So if you go to the Appeon Help and you have a look at debugging, and that it'll say before you can use this feature, you have to install this Microsoft piece. And that's easy to download, takes about a minute to install, and away you go. If you try and run this from Appeon, it'll say, hey, the Microsoft Script Debugger for the Internet Explorer is not installed. So once you've got that, it won't complain anymore. So how do you debug this thing if you have a problem? So let's go back now to the actual source code. So here's the source code. We're looking here at the login screen. There's a login screen. And of course, maybe we have a problem here with a script in the particular login itself. So I tested out locally, it works fine. It doesn't work fine in the Appeon environment. I like to debug that. So you notice here that second lower panel that you see here below here, which is all the Appeon information here that you can work on, that you do have the ability here to actually debug. Okay, so that's the hand here, the Appeon debugger that is available. Before you do that, however, you just have to do one thing. So if you look at the profile in the application Appeon Developer, we see here that it's a web application, Lost Logos, and that it's bound for standard release using PowerBuilder 12.6 if I was to scroll over. And that this is the important thing here is the mode. So if I go back to the mode, I can change this and say just put debugging information in for JavaScript, or I can say put debugging information in for both JavaScript and PowerScript. So that's the option that I would suggest that you use. Once you do that, you just hit OK. You go back to the deploy option, and what it's going to do is it's automatically going to redo a full deployment because it has to add all this debugging information into the actual executable part of the XML and C# objects, etc., etc. And that. So this will take a few seconds. This will take a little bit longer than the first time because, of course, a lot more debugging information. So you notice now you have the option that we had before that you can finish and run, or now you can finish and debug and that, or you can just finish. So it's up to you. So I'm going to choose finish and debug. Now you see what comes up is which application do you want to actually run from the debugger. And now you see, for example, here is the Appeon debugger screen. Now you say, hey, I got a problem here with the login window, the OK button, and the script for that. Let's have a look at the source code. Something's not working right here. So let's start debugging here right after we start trying to do the connect. So double click here. You can see that you do get a breakpoint automatically when you double click, just like PowerBuilder Classic. You have a run option here as well, just like PowerBuilder Classic. So we've got our breakpoint, and that we can see the source code, and we can execute it, start debug. Now I just wanted to point out that when I move to the Windows 10, I seem to have a weird situation here in IIS. When it launches the Microsoft Internet Explorer, I get this weird error message, Appeon can't be loaded. And what I found, there's some kind of a weird situation here when this happens, that all I have to do here is deploy again, just say redeploy an already generated application. I haven't tracked down the cause of that particular weird situation yet, but it does seem to happen. It may take a couple of times to run, and then it seems to load fine. So I've got a contention somewhere in one of my runtime DLLs. That doesn't happen in any of the other browsers. It just seems to be a Bill Gates weird scenario. So sometimes I just have to try the debugger a couple of times and away it goes. Right? Sometimes I think it's sometimes a DLL that just has a lock on it. It takes a few seconds to release the lock before it'll actually run everything fine again. So it seems to be a weird thing. If you encounter that in Windows 10, I never had the problem in Windows 7. Just keep persisting that and away you go. So let's say, for example, we enter a password and that. So now you can see here we are in the debugger and that. Now we can actually step over code. We can step into code. We can set the next statement to execute. We can run from that statement to the current breakpoint. So we can see the breakpoint itself, the calling history of what's going on. We can see the call stack. And that we can see the instance pool, global storage pool. We can see the transaction object here set to -1. So exactly the same as what you would find in robust debugging inside the PowerBuilder Classic IDE. So I'm just going to step here at this point and step over that and see what happens. Now you notice the first statement says, is this PowerBuilder? Well, it's not at this point. So if you looked at the local variable here, or the instance variable, and we'll see here that what's sitting in IS client is actually the word web at that point. So let me see if I can quickly find that. I may have to go to my global pool for that one. Because it's an instance of the window, not an instance of the command button. There we go. So you notice you double click it, you can change this value and that. So what's actually happened at this point is it's using a call to an Appeon routine, which is returning me back, are you mobile, are you web, or are you a native PB? And that. So Appeon has confirmed to me that we're running in a web environment. So I'm not going to use the standard connect at this point. I'm actually going to use that Active Directory here. So what it's going to do here is going to create a data store. It's going to actually pass some information to the data store, and that data store contains a web service data window called DW login validate, and that's basically then going to make the call over to the appropriate routine. Now, if we go back to under the hood of what's going on here, and I go to the Appeon Enterprise Manager, looking at the PowerBuilder features here, we can see here that there's a section here called Web Service Data Window. Looking at the Los Logos application, actually before we do that, you can see here that it is you do have one of your data windows is a web service data window. So if you want to look a little bit deeper, you see login validate is the data window here, and you can see that Appeon is automatically extracted from that data window source that the WSDL or Web Service Description Language pointer. Now, when I move from development to QA to system integration test to production, that I can go into each one of those Appeon servers, and I can say, hey, for quality assurance, this is the URL for where to pick up the WSDL for this environment, and when I get to production, I can say, do it this way, this is where you'll find it. So I just make quickly a global change here in the Appeon server and say, hey, all the web service data windows now point to this IIS instance for this environment or this environment or this environment. Okay, so what we're seeing here is it's loading the web service data window. It's loaded the object here. It's ready to actually pass some information to it, which of course has the user ID and password, which is going to now call the web service. So when I do the retrieve, the web service is called, and that the return code here locally says everything's okay. I got a +1, everything's fine. Because I have one row, I can do a get item and it loads it here into a variable called RC, and that we see the return code is 0, which is like a database. 0 is okay. Anything below that, you're in trouble. And so the login was accepted. Everything's okay. We destroy the data store, data window object at that point, and away we go. Is the return code 0? That we can continue on. So away we go at that point. So I just said continue on. I use the continue arrow here. Then if you want, you can just minimize that and keep on going. You can bring the debugger back from its minimized state at any time, add breakpoints, watch points. So if you're down later on into a different part of the application, and you're saying, hey, I'm having a trouble here with the retrieve button on the report window, just go back into your debugger, look at the script, set a breakpoint, and then the next time you actually hit the retrieve button here, boom, the Appeon debugger is going to pop in, and you can basically enjoy a rich debugging session just like you would in PowerBuilder Classic. All right. All right, so that's one of the nice things here. When you get into a lot of tools, you do need some robust debugging pieces. They are there. There are other things as well, but this is one of the mainstays that you probably use in the Appeon web product. Okay, so the next question is, what happens if you not just taking an existing PowerBuilder application, but you wanted to build a PowerBuilder application that really looks and feels like a web application? Now, I had this challenge about 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, when I picked up a contract at Passport Canada, and they wanted to build web applications, and we wanted to reuse some of the PowerBuilder logic that we already had in our native Win32 apps. And I said, hey, we can do that. If you get Appeon Web, we can integrate those pieces, we can call web services. And then, of course, the first thing they said is, if you're going to build a web application, I don't care whether you deploy it internally or externally to the general public, it has to look like the government standard, which in Canada is CLF, or Common Look and Feel. It's managed by a department called Treasury Board of Canada, and it says anybody who puts up a web application has to conform to these standards. So here's the one I just picked up at random. It's the Federal Court of Appeal. It's actually the tax court. They actually use PowerBuilder there and that. So let's just look at their actual web application. So I have a a link there. So we're now live at this point. So it's on the actual web itself, and that we're live on their site. If we look here, you'll see that anytime you resize that, everything keeps centered. Anytime you hover the mouse over top at this point of anything, you get a pop-up hover text of what's going on. You can dynamically change languages at any time, and that you can go from French to English and back again. That's a Canadian standard, and that because you don't know if we support 2 official languages, you don't know if the user is coming in English or French. That if you do drill down, so you always have a navigation bar on the left-hand side. If you drill down further into a subset, you can see here along the top you have a navigation of what's going on, where you entered the website, and you drop down to this area, then you drop down to that area. Now you're looking at new decisions, for example. And now you can have, of course, whatever number of objects that you need to perform that function that you want. So this is sort of a standard way of building a website. Okay, so what I wanted to show you here before I get to this part here is what I did on an application called PCI, or Payment Card Industry, that we did for Passport. And I can show you that one by going back to the web browser, and I'll run a little example I have. I built this prototype before I actually built the real application. So this is the prototype that I built, and this is done in, again, PowerBuilder with Appeon Web. Built this about 3 years ago, and it took me about a week to build it, and it's pretty much fully functional. It just doesn't have the, all the bells and whistles in it that the production one did. It took about, in total, maybe 2 months to build this thing from scratch, and I'll talk about that, some of the other pieces behind the scenes in a few seconds. But you can see here we have a login screen. You should always allow the user to enter your application in either official language, English or French. You notice the hover text is working exactly the same, and that when I do that, if I click on any of these links, for example, this is actually going to take us to the production live website. And so information about actually obtaining a Canadian passport. And so that's standard, common look and feel. That you have to tell the person in both official languages that what the application is. And so you notice French is on the left, English is on the right, because Passport Canada is in the province of Quebec, which is primarily a French-speaking province. Therefore, the French always comes first from left to right. If the government department is located in Ontario, which is English-speaking province, then the English would be on the left, French would be on the right. So a whole bunch of rules that you have to abide by if you ever want to get your web application out to the general public. But you notice here that what I can do here is I can actually put in my domain, my user ID, I can enter my password. This is actually going to check an Active Directory check to make sure that that domain and Chris Pollach is valid for this application. So there's actually a call to a PowerBuilder web service that actually communicates with Active Directory to validate that. And now here's the primary web page itself. Notice that you can flip between English and French at any time. If you follow any of the navigation bars here, you can see here that just below the title bar, there's always a navigation that to tell you you entered here, you went to there, and you went to there. And so that's following the same. This application is using Protected B application, so I have to tell the user that you're in a Protected B application. So Protected A, anything that comes out of this application inadvertently could be an embarrassment to the Canadian government. Protected B, there's a serious security risk of information if that was leaked. And Protected C comes up into the military, and that CIS counter-access, which is like the CIA. Basically, information could be not only embarrassing to the Canadian government, but could hurt the safety of the Canadian people. So those are the 3 different scenarios that we have. Now, if this is a Protected B application, which it is, for example, if I do a Control C, it says, hey, you can't copy this. to the clipboard. You can't do a print screen, you can't do anything. So interesting that Appeon Web allowed me this kind of low-level control. And that was a very important thing, and it seems like that's a minor thing. You say, oh, geez, you know, who cares if a user can do a Control-C on some sensitive information, but try and pass that through your security people on a TRA, which is a threat and risk assessment. In the Canadian government, there's no way your application is going to production, whether it's internal or external. So Appeon allowed me to easily do that because I can trap that in PowerBuilder, and Appeon says, hey, if you do it in PowerBuilder, I can write the appropriate HTML and JavaScript to make that happen. So, which it does. So I can protect the print screen, the Control-C, Control-P, that whatever you want. So what you're looking at here, you notice that on the left-hand side you can zoom and you can zoom back this way. You can zoom here as well. And that, so the Canadian standard is that doesn't matter what web page you're on, everything has to be rescalable. And you have to be able to change colors because people have color issues or they have visual acuity issues, so you have to be able to zoom on that. So this application follows that. And what you're actually looking at this point, if we go back to the next slide, is you're looking at this. And so what I did in my framework about 3.5 years ago, I created this thing called a layout manager, and then I created another thing called a container. That inside the container can be any kind of other standard controls. And what you're actually looking at in my web application is you're looking at a header, a navigation, and a detail area. Everything in those user objects are data windows. No ifs, ands, or buts. I just don't use standard controls. Everything that you see there is a data window. So if we go back to the actual look here in that we can see here that this is a data window, this is a tree view data window, and this is a data window, all within a tab page. So I do use some standard controls, but when I deliver the main pieces of information, that you're really looking at a data window, whether it be an external data window or whether it's a data window that's actually hooked and doing some interaction with the database. And of course you have the hover text, Government of Canada, and that symbol of the Government of Canada, and that you can get the help information here. So you notice here it brings up a PDF document that you can read all about the payment card industry. For those of you who don't know, PCI, for example, payment card industry is a standard. The American Express, Diners Club, Visa, all of them have created a consortium that says, hey, if you want to deal with me, if you want to use my credit services, this is what, whether you're government or private industry, you have to abide by these standards. That's what the PCI stands for. So what this application does, if you look at it, so that's how it's actually designed at this point. It's designed to actually go and do that kind of thing. But one of the interesting things here, and I wanted to show you this, is the low-level control. So what this actually does here is it actually integrates a open source OCR engine called Tesseract with another open source imaging thing called Image Magic. So what happens here behind the scenes is that there's a whole bunch of PowerBuilder web services that are interacting with the OCR engine and the imaging engines at this point. So the imaging, I've actually called the imaging engine here when I select images on the left-hand side, and you can actually see a passport form at this point. And what it's indicating to the user at this point is that somebody may have used a credit card and may have left the credit card available somewhere and that to be seen and written down. And of course that goes against the PCI standards. That says no way that you should expose a full credit card information to the outside world. And that hence the protected B application. Now this may be hard to see, so you'll see here if you double click it, that it goes into a response window that allows you to zoom this even closer. So some things can be harder to see because sometimes you actually get credit cards, for example, that are actually written down the left-hand side. You never know what's going to happen here. But the user can actually zoom this to whatever level they want and scroll through it to find the information. They can stay in regular mode as well. But the zoom mode there was something that I put in so that, again, you can see things. And notice here that there is a credit card information here. I just scanned in a blank form for testing here, but you could have Visa, MasterCard, American Express information, which is the 3 credit cards that Passport Canada will accept. And there could actually be a name and a credit card, the date of expiry, and stuff like that. So you don't want to do that. Now, if you're having trouble finding that, you can say here, find a credit card in this toolbar at the top. And if you do that, you'll see here, I'm calling the OCR engine. The OCR engine is saying, hey, I'm seeing credit card information at this location within the scanned image at this point. So it's pointing it out to you. Now, if you actually saw some credit card information here, you can open up this target area here from the right-hand side, and you can go here and you can basically come in here and put a lasso in here. Now, all these are rectangle drawing objects in the data window. That's all you're looking at. And I'm basically just manipulating that here with this little floating toolbar. So now when the red triangle is mapped exactly, that user is saying, hey, this is the area that there's no way you should be able to see this. And that. So you notice here you have another button up here. It says redact the selected area. Boom. That calls a web service, which calls the imaging engine, which basically goes and says, hey, at these coordinates for this size, you need to redact it. And after you finish redacting it, you also need to put this writing on top that says this is the date and time that was redacted. This is the eSurf number, which is our tracking number for the passport application. That this information has been cleaned up. And now you can actually then save that back into the database, or you can basically abort at this point. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and then it just picks up another form. So you can say pick up an applicant form or a supporting document. The supporting document would be something like, their marriage license, or what it could contain. A credit card, of course, is you did some traveling, you came to Canada, and we scanned in your Air Canada or your Lufthansa information, your flight information, and some idiot put a credit card number down on it, and boom. That's not good for us to save in our database. So you notice here that you can actually rotate the form, and that to the left, you can rotate it to the right, and that whatever you like. You can flip it horizontally, that you can flip it vertically. Those are just, again, calls to the web service which brokers the communication to ImageMagick to do that for you. And that, again, that's just an open source thing that's happening. So this is what's happening here behind the scenes in this application, but I thought it would be good to show you that you can build a web application to make it look like whatever you want, a real web application, yet you can get that low-level control that you really need when you're building some industrial strength type production applications with Appeon Web. All right, so now that you've done that, you said, oh, geez, this is a great application. Now, why don't I actually make the whole world access to it? Maybe you want to put it on a cloud. So I thought I'd show you the fact that I've actually helped a friend of mine who's actually located here not too far away from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. He runs a business called Airman, and it's actually installed in a lot of major airports around North America. And basically what it does is it allows you to capture critical information about the operations of your airport, and produces all sorts of management reports, FAA reports, and about what's happening around the airport, what incidents have happened, that are you doing things proactively, things like that. So what I did is I actually created an Amazon E2 instance for the Airman company, and who's run by Greg Winfield, by the way. And what I did for Greg is I created the E2 instance in the Amazon. I then uploaded everything to take his application, convert it to Appeon Web, because it was a native PowerBuilder Win32 application. So let's see if we can take a little quick detour on that one. And what I need to do here is I can actually remote desktop into the real Amazon environment. And that, thanks to Greg, he's allowing me to do this for you today. This will take a second. Boom, here we go. And that. So what I did, and that is, you can see here that there's the Appeon Enterprise Manager. And that, so this is what it looks like on the Amazon thing. So what I did here is I basically took his, he bought Appeon Web. We basically FTP'd the software up into the Amazon Cloud E2 instance. And then if you look at, for example, these are the different airman systems for the different airports. So here, for example, you can see that Boston, for example, is sitting here. So these are examples of different airports, Niagara, for Niagara Falls and Boston. He's got all sorts of other ones as well. But you can actually see the application has been deployed for different airports on the cloud. The only thing I couldn't get working, it was so simple until I got to here, was that I couldn't FTP. So I solved that by actually using FileZilla. So you can see here the FileZilla server installed. So what I ended up doing is downloading to this cloud instance FileZilla server, which is free, by the way. And boom, once I got that running, I could FTP all the Appeon and PowerBuilder runtime software for web services, install it on this instance, which is a 2008 R2 instance, and away it went first time. And so once I got sort of the housekeeping out of the way, everything works out just great. So you can see a dashboard agent running here, so that's written in PowerBuilder. So what happens here, let me just log off the actual Amazon site, and if we bring back the web browser, and that I'll close here, and we'll actually go to the airman site. So this is what Joe Public would do, an airport coming in. So it's a little bit slower to load the first time because we're actually coming off the west coast of the United States is where that E2 instance is running. You have a choice when you allocate a cloud machine as to what geographic area you would like it done. So this is where it's running now. It's actually running out of Seattle at this point. You can choose your airport, and then you just basically log in. It says, hey, you're entering a demonstration area, but we're actually looking at the airman application that was up until recently just a Win32, has now been converted to a web browser application, which is now running from a cloud, and away we go. So Greg's doing a little bit of caching here. You notice that progress bar that was running. Everything's okay now, and we can open the dashboard. And this is, again, just the data window, and now you can see what's going on. These are things that management needs to have a look at, what kind of hazmat things have happened, noise complaints, parking, security, that type of thing, what employees or people have made suggestions, and that what kind of equipment has been deployed today to do different things. These are probably fuel trucks, and that my employees got some training, for example, on operating the ramp for the aircraft, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's many different things that you can do here. You can get reports. So you can see here that couple of seconds here, that should load. Then I can choose a report that I want, the date and time, things like that. I can have a look at position information. All right. So this isn't loaded here with the actual map, but when it's all loaded, I will be able to actually see an aerial view of the airport and look down on it and have a look at what's going on here. So in this test environment here, he's just using it to play with. But you can see here the functionality of this toolbar across the top here. The data windows are running properly. The drop-down lists are working properly. So the data windows, the user object toolbars are rendering correctly, and away we go. Now this will typically get faster within a minute or two. Once things are cached even further, then it'll run even faster. I'm probably one of the first people into the instance today. All right. So I just wanted to point that out, that that's another important thing when you go to Appeon Web, that once you webify it, away you go. You can put it on the cloud, and you're good to go. Oops. All right. The other thing you can do, we talked a bit about performance here. If you are having performance problems, there's a lot of things that you can do in the native PowerBuilder area. You can actually do system trace. You can use the PowerBuilder application profiler to do things. You could also have these similar types of tools also in the Appeon environment. That you do have a performance analyzer, very similar to what you have in PowerBuilder. You can monitor. There's actually an Appeon server status monitor that you can use, that you can actually see what's going on. There is a performance analyzer that you can use. And also in the Appeon Enterprise Manager, there are things that you can do here that to actually control that how many threads are being allocated, how much memory is being allocated here as well. The thing is, it's easy to use the performance analyzer here on the left by going into the performance settings and do this performance analyzer compliance. So if I wanted to actually see this analyzer in action, I'll just go here to the profile. Oh, that's already running somewhere. I'm not sure where. Oh, let me just close the debugger. That probably was it. All right. So if I go and edit the profile, you'll see under miscellaneous settings, performance settings, that here's a performance analyzer compliance. Just check that in the miscellaneous settings. Once you do that, all you need to do at that point is you will have to quick deploy. Again, now you can just use the incremental deploy once you hit that checkbox. And then what you'll see, and I don't want to take too much time because I know Liz has got to try and finish this by 12:45, and that is once you do that, you check that box, then you're going to see this come up, and it will start capturing statistics about how much time and how much memory, et cetera, that as you go through, as you can see here, you go through the modify event or scroll to the next row, and how long your set text works. You get a complete breakdown just like you would do running the application profiler in PowerBuilder Classic. So these are the kind of things that I find that when you're doing a really robust production application, you need all these type of things, the heavy-duty debugging and the performance analysis, to really fine-tune your code so that it really works well, especially when you're going to go out to the cloud. So at this point, that's sort of like the first high-level technical under-the-hood look at the engine and the transmission and the fuel injectors and the steering linkage and the hydraulic braking system. And we haven't gone down into to those systems and really looked under the hood of those systems, but I'm basically just giving you a high-level sort of whet your appetite, and that is to what you actually can do with this amazing product. Like I said at the beginning of Wednesday's part one, once you get into this product, PowerBuilder programmers will probably prefer to use Appeon Web than if you give them a piece of chocolate, because you're just going to get just an amazing technical high when you start peeling back the onion and finding out how many robust features that they've actually put into this product. It's just amazing.